August 2021, New York. This is an invoice. One page. A college math professor billed $13,300 for a few days of work. The description says what he built. A data set containing 4,265,085 rows. Names, email addresses, phone numbers, people who did not exist. By the professor's sworn account, the client sent it back with one request. Remove the description, resubmit the invoice as a number and nothing else. Then she paid $18,000, nearly $5,000 more than he had asked. 5 weeks later, JPMorgan Chase paid $175 million for the startup that List was built to sell. The bank valued each supposed student at about $41. Creating the invented ones had cost less than half a cent each. This is the story of Frank Charlie Javis and the 4 million customers who were not there. It is also the story of a bank that verified whether every row was full and apparently never verified whether the people were real. Frank began with a genuine problem. The old free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, forced families through more than 100 questions to unlock grants and student loans. Javis, a Wharton graduate in her 20s, built a friendlier interface. Frank helped students complete the form, appeal aid decisions, and find scholarships. It was not vapor. Real students used it, roughly 300,000 of them, according to the later court record. The company raised real money. It attracted prominent investors. Forbes placed Javis on its 30 under 30 list. She described Frank as an Amazon for higher education, one place for every financial decision a student might make. That comparison mattered because Amazon's real power is not its storefront. It is the customer relationship. By 2021, Frank was in talks with major banks. Young customers are extraordinarily valuable. Win a student at her first financial decision, and she may remain with the bank for decades. Javis repeatedly represented that Frank had 4.25 million users. She defined a user as someone who had signed up and supplied at least a first name, last name, email address, and phone number. The real number was roughly 300,000. The claimed number was 14 times larger. About 93% of the company's headline asset did not exist. JPMorgan wanted proof. It asked for the customer data, the thing it was actually buying. Javis resisted, citing student privacy. That concern was not invented. Many users had been minors, and personal data could not simply be handed to a bidder. But in this negotiation, privacy also created a wall between the bank and the evidence. The bank still wanted a file that could be tested. According to sworn testimony, Javis first asked Frank's director of engineering, Patrick Vovor, to create synthetic users, statistically plausible rows modeled on the real customers. Vovor asked whether that was legal. He refused. He later told the jury that Javis reassured him she did not want to end up in an orange jumpsuit. The request then moved outside the company. Adam Kapellner, an associate professor of mathematics at Queens College, received Frank's real file, fewer than 300,000 rows, and was asked to expand it past 4 million. Synthetic data can serve legitimate purposes. It can help researchers test software without exposing real people. Here, prosecutors said it was used to make a small customer base look enormous during an acquisition. Kapellner generated 4,265,085 complete rows, names that look like names, emails shaped like emails, phone numbers with valid-looking area codes. Statistically, a crowd, actually nobody. Kapellner later testified for the government and was never criminally charged. He also supplied the invoice from the cold open. His original bill described the data work. The revised bill did not. The next step is the mechanism this entire case turns on. Because Frank would not give the customer file directly to JPMorgan, the parties agreed to use a third-party data company. Axiom received the file and performed the validation it had been asked to perform. Its finding was accurate. 100% of the rows contained the required fields: first name, last name, email, phone. But that finding answered only whether the spreadsheet was complete. It did not answer whether those rows belonged to Frank customers. It did not answer whether the email addresses worked. It did not answer whether the phone numbers reached students. It did not answer whether the people existed. The file was validated. The customers were not. That distinction is the whole con. With the report in hand, JPMorgan completed the acquisition in September 2021 for $175 million. The bank's announcement said Frank served more than 5 million students at thousands of schools. Havas became a managing director at Chase. Government filings later put the value of her equity proceeds and contracted retention package in the tens of millions. The bank had paid about $41 for every claimed customer. It still had not spoken to a meaningful sample of them. At roughly the same time, Chavez and Frank's chief growth officer, Olivier Amar, acquired a separate list from a student marketing data broker. This list contained millions of real young people. They were not necessarily Frank customers. They were names available for purchase. The price was $105,000, about 2.3 cents per person. Compare that with JPMorgan's price, roughly $41 per claimed Frank user. The same basic unit, a name, an email, a phone number, was worth nearly 1,800 times more after being wrapped in the story that these people had chosen Frank. Prosecutors said additional data was purchased to fill missing fields. After the deal closed, when JPMorgan wanted the customer data for marketing, the purchase list was passed off as Frank's users. The synthetic file helped the deal close. The purchase file was supposed to survive the marriage. For a while it did. In January 2022, Chase marketers sent a test campaign to roughly 400,000 supposed Frank users. Email campaigns are boring. That is why they make good measuring instruments. JPMorgan later said a clean list normally delivered about 99% of its messages. The Frank campaign delivered only 28%. 72% bounced. And among the messages that landed, only about 1.1% were opened, far below the bank's normal rate. A marketing dashboard had performed the reality check the acquisition process missed. The bank investigated. The professor's file surfaced. The invoice surfaced. The broker purchases surfaced. Havas was fired for cause in November 2022. JPMorgan sued her and Amar the following month. Frank shut down in January 2023. On an earnings call, JPMorgan chief executive Jamie Dimon called the acquisition a huge mistake. In April 2023, federal prosecutors charged Havas with conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and securities fraud. The Securities and Exchange Commission filed a parallel civil case. Amar was also charged. Both pleaded not guilty and went to trial. The criminal trial lasted 6 weeks in Manhattan. The government presented the engineer who refused, the professor who built the file, the invoice whose description disappeared, the third-party validation, the purchase data, and the failed email campaign. The defense called it buyer's remorse. JPMorgan was one of the most sophisticated financial institutions in the world. Its diligence had been astonishingly thin, the defense argued, and a powerful bank should bear responsibility for its own deal. There is an uncomfortable truth inside that argument. The bank's diligence was weak. A formatting check was allowed to stand in for proof of the asset that justified the price. But weak diligence did not create 4 million invented rows. On March 28, 2025, the jury convicted Havas and Amar on all 4 counts. Havas was sentenced that September to 85 months in federal prison. The court imposed a forfeiture judgment of more than $22 million and restitution of more than $287 million, jointly owed with Amar. Amar later received 68 months. Their criminal appeals remain pending in the Second Circuit as of this production. The convictions are adjudicated facts. The appellate process is not finished. And one of the strangest costs continues outside the criminal case. Because of the agreements executed during the acquisition, courts have required JPMorgan to advance substantial defense expenses connected to litigation over the deal. The bank paid $175 million for Frank. The financial damage recognized at sentencing grew far beyond the purchase price. Strip away the startup language, and this is an old fraud. In the salad oil swindle, tanks appeared to contain valuable inventory. Inspectors checked the top. Beneath the surface was seawater. Frank's spreadsheet was a digital tank farm. Every row had the right labels. The names looked plausible. The columns were full. The validation reached the surface and stopped. One phone call could have challenged it. One sample email could have challenged it. After the money moved, a routine marketing test did exactly that. So, write the rule in the ledger. Growth nobody verifies is fiction nobody has found yet. The customer list is the tank farm of the software age. You still have to look inside the rows. The primary records for this case are linked in the description. Next on the ledger, the coffee chain that invented hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, and the investigators who counted receipts until the numbers broke.